Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is none other than StrongFirst Elite instructor, John Parker. And if you don't know, StrongFirst Elite means that he has been certified in level 1 and level 2 kettlebell skills, barbell skills, and bodyweight skills. So he is a very serious instructor. I've been following him for a really long time on Instagram, on Facebook, and all these other different places. And I always really enjoy his posts and his insights. And so we selfishly get him all to ourselves in this episode to soak up even more of these delicious insights that he is going to be dropping. And we're going to be talking in particular about we've got a very unique approach to training with both single and double kettlebells in a way that helps you to build more strength and do so without having to crush yourself in the process. And he's going to talk a little bit about why this is so common, where people get completely wiped out from their training and why it's not necessary in order to build strength. So I'm very much looking forward to this. He's also got a program called Med Chains, which we're going to be going into some detail about. And now, before we do that, I would be remiss if I don't mention this, because if this is your first time hearing the Hammercast, or maybe, second, whatever, I have a free ebook called the 9-Minute Kettlebell and Bodyweight Challenge. And it's designed around gait pattern movements that, when you strengthen them, help you to get stronger at just about everything else. I've gotten a lot of really great feedback on it. What's really nice, too, is that it's designed to be done in conjunction with your regular training. And it's made to complement your workouts, not complicate them. So a lot of times people will do them either as a warm-up or as a finisher. And they find that as time goes on, their training gets a lot easier. They get a lot stronger. They feel more connected. And of course, it's free. So, why not dive into that? So 9minutechallenge.com. It's the number 9minutechallenge.com. And you can grab your own free copy and put it to good use and let me know how you like it. All right. So without further ado, John, welcome to the program.
Alex, thank you so much for having me. And likewise, I've been following you forever and reading your write-ups, which have always been super fun for me because they're a little bit more long form and provocative in a way, not a bad way, but just makes you think. And I've always really appreciated that about someone, that they can write and they can articulate their thoughts. And if it were me, I have to write in order to understand myself. So I very much appreciate reading all of your content over the years. And I think it's been maybe 7 or 8 years that we've been friends on Facebook that I've been checking that out. So thank you to you.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate that. And I agree with you completely. I remember I was watching a video. This is the first time I'd ever heard it said like this, but it made perfect sense to me. And it was Jordan Peterson was talking about how writing is like thinking slowed down. And for me, it's certainly the case too. It's like, if I want to, and this is true for anything, it's like whether it's concepts and training, like I'm trying to explain something that like I can just I don't want to say intuitively know, but from experience that I've had either with training other people or what have you. The minute I have to try to explain it to somebody else and I can put it in writing, now it's like clearer in my own mind, and so it's easier for me to make these other connections. And so I think writing is something that to me it's like a must. Like if I don't do it, I don't think as well. And so I'm glad that you're getting something out of it in addition to just me, being able to like clarify my thoughts. That's it's very good to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I struggled early on. I was a history major in college and Spanish literature major. So did a lot of writing and was quite verbose in those days with my writing, and kind of realized that simplifying everything down and using brief thoughts, but still articulate at the same time, that was the way to go. So still a work in progress for me when I write, but it's a lot of fun to go through the proofreading process and the editing process, and then truly almost not dumb it down in a bad way, but dumb it down in a way that everyone can understand without using these $10 words. It's a really fun process. And if I had an art, that would be it.
Yeah. You know what? I have to say, I'm very glad to hear that you also use the term $10 words, because I thought I was the only person who still used it. It's one of my favorite ways to describe, like trying to use especially big words, like for the sake of impressing people. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I can definitely say that I was in a similar circumstance, because when I finished my degree, which was in English writing and linguistics, which you would think, oh, well, of course, no wonder he writes so much. But That's not really not the case. It was more about like the how to teach writing and stuff like that. And I only did it because I liked linguistics and I wanted to become a linguist. And then I got my degree and I was like, I just don't really want to do this anymore. So I became a meathead professionally.
Nice.
But I remember when I started writing a blog, because back then, people wrote blogs, right? This is a while ago, folks. But I remember trying to write blogs about like kettlebell training. I was like, gee, it sounds like I'm writing an academic paper. Like I just written so many of them for my degree that it was like the creativity had gotten beaten out of me. It took me like a year and a half to kind of like chip away at it and have a little bit more authentic expression of me. So it does take time. I think a lot of people like kind of marvel at the discipline of writing, but the reality is you just have to do it, and you can't try to emulate anybody else. You have to just try to express what you want to say in a way that you think your audience is gonna agree with, or not agree with necessarily, but is going to be agreeable for them to read. Like you said, use $10 words that go over their head. They're gonna be like, all right, I'm lost already. I'm just gonna watch cat videos on YouTube or whatever. So I can definitely say it is a work in progress. That much we can definitely agree on.
Yeah, and it's cliche to say, but just have fun doing it. And writing for a lot of people is just not something that are interested in. Probably they were burnt out on it in school. But
Yeah.
what I like to do is probably something similar to you, just write down as many words as possible, as fast as I can. And then really writing is going back and editing all that stuff and make it sound good. So the flow of the words, it's almost like poetry, and having the paragraphs be pretty much the same length, the same amount of sentences, and have it flow to someone's eyes so they want to keep on reading. That's the fun part of it for me. So that's what I try and do.
It's interesting because I think I have like a weird approach to it, because like a lot of times what I'll do is like I'll write something and then I might get stuck, but then I think of something else that would be good later on. So I'll like leave a couple of, spaces, and then I'll start writing like the rudiments of that so I don't forget it. And then I'll go back. So I'm always like, I have like a very ADD style of writing. It's like bouncing back and forth between stuff. I don't recommend people do that. That's like generally not the recommended approach. But I do that a lot. Or other times if I get stuck, like I'll just start writing something in that it never in a million years allow to go in. It would be like something obscene or whatever, just that like makes me laugh, because it kind of like breaks the monotony of doing it. And then kind of once you get that, that relaxation that comes with laughter, then it's easier to keep going. So we should do like a whole course on like writing for fitness professionals. And
Oh, that'd be great. You know what's so funny about my writing is I will do a final 2 or 3 proofreads, and I'll ask myself, does this paragraph need to be in here? And sometimes I'll just delete 8 sentences at once, and then I find, oh, the finished product is exactly what I wanted. So it's tough to get all your thoughts down in a brief manner, but I think that's what makes it readable, and that's what makes it approachable to a lot of people. So yeah, writing is definitely a work in progress. I don't think it's something that one will ever master, but I think that's the whole point of doing it, right? You want to approach that and just get better over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you make a good point too, that a lot of times in order to make something better, you have to take things out. And so that's going to be a big focus of our chat today, because I know that, your training, I read a little bit about it. Not a little bit. I read a lot about it, that you had started off, or you had ended up, we'll say, like by the age of 32, just like completely burned out, like fried from your training. And it was because, unlike with your writing, you were packing in more stuff. You were trying to cram in more work. And we can consider this kind of like the beginning of the movie, where you're looking at like, okay, here's what's going to happen. And then we go back like within a few minutes, and then we start from the beginning. And so I want to get up to that point, like how you ended up working yourself into that point of burnout. And I want to start all the way at the beginning, because I realize I know very little about your origin story. Were you always athletic? Were you always very strong? Is this something that you kind of came across as you got older? Like, what was your childhood like in terms of like strength and athleticism and that sort of a thing?
Yeah, as a kid, I was always very athletic. Sports were my main interest, playing baseball, basketball, football, swimming, and then the extracurriculars, which is what my main foci were, but wasn't allowed to do them full time. That was skateboarding, BMX riding, and snowboarding. So I loved doing all of that stuff. fast forward a couple of years, I had swum and played water polo a bit as well for maybe 3 or 4 years. But in high school, I focused on basketball, track, and football. And after freshman year, I just played football and track and field. Those were year-round sports, so those were my main focuses. And I had started lifting also around age 13 or 14 for football. So the summer from 8th grade into 9th grade, I had my introduction to strength training. Back then, it was all about the three main lifts, not deadlifts, but power cleans, bench press, and back squats. And in addition to doing that, we always had things like speed camps. I'm a fast runner, so I played tailback and wide receiver in high school. I also played defensive back and free safety. Those are my main positions, kind of a utility player on my team. But with the speed training, with the sprinting, with the football, it was always doing some sort of lifting. So that was always in the background. I think in my mind, my focuses were still snowboarding, skating, and riding bikes. I just loved doing that. But as I got a little bit older and busier with schoolwork and my sports were year round, those really took most of my time. Now, going through high school, I played all 4 years. I was on varsity for football and for track and field, but I decided probably junior year that I was going to continue most with track and field, just based on my size. I knew I could get into college. I actually got early acceptance at the University of California, San Diego, junior year to run track and field. My main events were the 100 meter, the 4x100 meter, long jump. So really a power focused athlete. That's just something I've always had within me, not a super big endurance guy, but I've always been really strong and powerful. So going into junior year, I focused on football and track and field. Football, not so much, because again, I knew I was going to go to college for the 100 meter. So running year round, lifting year round. And then I finally went to college. And by that point, it was the first time in my life where I had the decision of whether or not I wanted to continue with the sport or not. So I decided I was not going to continue with it. I was pretty burnt out. And I remember even back then just thinking about coaches' egos and really hating that stuff, because it wasn't really about the sport necessarily. Sometimes you'd have these coaches bickering back and forth, and I was just totally burnt out on doing anything organized. So freshman year of college, I quit. And it lasted about 2 weeks where I settled into my new schedule and found that I was super bored and purposeless. So I went back to training in the gym with some of my college roommates. And that really began my life's practice of strength training and bodybuilding and power building and whatever else it was. So my real education in college was that of lifting and nutrition. So after a year of study abroad, I was lifting while I was doing that and playing sports and climbing, doing some bouldering and skating, all that good stuff. I got my certified strength and conditioning specialist certification right before I graduated college. And that set me on my path. And I became a personal trainer right after that. So that's how I got here. And I'm really just still very interested in this stuff. I read as much as I can, study as much as I can. So it's like I'm learning more now than I learned even in my 20s. And it truly is my passion. It's something I think about all the time. It's something I talk about all the time. And usually that's the subject of conversation for anyone I meet. So kind of my origin story, and still going strong.
Well, that's amazing. And, I think that you had a good combination too, to have started lifting relatively early, because a lot of times, it's kind of like a catch-22. So we know that in general, when you're a kid, you need to do a lot of different things, because as they say, like, you're kind of building up your baggage for movement. And one of the mistakes that I think a lot of parents make is they let their kids get involved in like year-round sports. So it's like, okay, well, they're just going to play baseball all year. Whereas it makes more sense to kind of do what you did. Like, you had like snowboarding and that sort of a thing, presumably in the winter months, right? So you can go and do that sort of a thing. You had other physical activities that you like to do, like riding your bike and stuff like that. But then the other missing link, it seems to be with a lot of people, is that their kids don't necessarily do any strength training. So it's like they play a lot of sports, which is smart, but then they don't do any strength training. So it's like they're just constantly performing at the highest level that they can, and they're not actually expanding their ability to go any higher. So when you're constantly working on your edges, something's going to fray eventually. You're either going to get some sort of a preventable injury, or you're going to burn out. You're just not going to care anymore. So yeah, I think in that regard, you were fortunate. It's kind of a bummer that you had coaches with such big egos that they're always, fighting with each other all the time. But like you said, that's somewhat par for the course. And I don't think that, well, I'm sure even in our industry, it doesn't really change that much. You go to any like online forum and you'll see the same thing. But what I'm really curious about too is because back when you and I were growing up, nobody knew what a kettlebell was. We had no clue. Everything was either barbells, dumbbells, or machines, and that was essentially it. How did you get introduced to the kettlebell, and like what was your first reaction to training with one?
I remember I was working a front desk position at one of the local box gyms. It was a nice luxury gym here in San Diego. It no longer exists, but I saw a lot of trainers there and I really admired them and couldn't wait to get my foot in the door and start training clients. And I saw kettlebells back then. So this must have been about 2006, 2007. Didn't think much of it. Now, I had gone to the Czech Institute for some of my education. I got the exercise coach certification. It was a 5-day course, a college level course. And after that, I had seen some videos from Paul Chek, some of their like scientific core and back conditioning and power training, a lot of med ball work. And one of the models there was Franz Schneidman. And Franz Schneidman, I think he was at like the first or second RKC certification. So way back when, early 2000s. And I knew that he was local. So at the time I was living in the area of La Jolla in San Diego. So really popular fitness area, well-known spot. And I knew he was local. So I had actually gone into his facility to say, hey, I know who you are. I saw you in all these videos. Franz was super friendly to me and I was just a youngster back then. And we were talking about kettlebells because he had this kettlebell gym. And he asked me to show him my swing and I didn't know how to swing at all. And he was just kind enough to give me like a 15, 20-minute lesson on kettlebells. So that was my first introduction, was my future mentor, Franz. And from there, it was kind of an interest to me. However, I was still very involved with power building. So kind of the combination of powerlifting and bodybuilding. Lifted a lot of barbells, lifted a lot of dumbbells, but didn't really get into actual kettlebell training until about 2013 or so. I was working as a trainer finally, and Franz had a studio up the street and we got to talking and he wanted me to teach some group classes up there. I was going to go independent, get away from the big box gym, and decided to take that lead. And I started my own self-study of kettlebell work. I started teaching some of his group classes up there based on kettlebells. He was really happy with that. And I would train from the gym. And in the meantime, I would ask a million questions like an annoying young guy, like really interested in it. And Franz taught me a lot of that stuff. And I had no plans of getting certified. I was pretty happy with what I was doing and getting busy as a trainer, but I had a bunch of friends. We all had a sprinting club back then. Franz a big sprinter, and obviously I ran throughout my life. So we would sprint, and I learned everyone in our sprinting club was going to the StrongFirst Level 1 back in 2014. And I wasn't quite sure. It was kind of expensive, but they peer pressured me. So I signed up 2 weeks before the certification, didn't train for it, just practiced on my own and was able to pass. And the standards back then were a little bit tougher than they are now, but that was the start of it. And after that, I just got really, really into kettlebell training, and especially double kettlebell training. I always thought that was super cool to do, and, doubled the load, doubled the intensity. So you could have a great training effect from that. And that's when I started training double kettlebells. And all along, I was still doing body weight work, still doing some sprinting, a lot of barbell work, deadlifts, power cleans, back squats, not so much bench press, kind of jacked up my shoulders early, but yeah, that was about it. So 2014 got certified and was still teaching classes and just started my own practice of kettlebell work.
That's incredible. I can see too that the pattern of like when you were a kid doing all these different activities kind of transferred into your adulthood, because you maintained a lot of different focuses as you were going along. I think a lot of times people, as we get older in particular, we have a tendency to kind of try to narrow our repertoire down a little bit. And I think that it's important, at least periodically, to venture out into things that we haven't been doing, because the other alternative is like, the options you give yourself for your training are so slim that you end up kind of working yourself into a corner. But you had a sort of a different issue, because rather than working yourself into a narrow corner of like a very minimal amount of movements that you were doing, you went a little too far out, and you started training in such a way that you were doing too many things and you couldn't recover from all of it.
Mhm.
And I think this is something that people can relate to, even if they've never truly experienced it the way that you did, because everyone knows what it's like to wake up the next day after a really hard workout and you're like, oh, I just can't work out today. That's really minor. But what you had was something a little bit more severe. So walk us through that. Like, what was it like when you mentioned, like, in your early 30s, you were finding you just couldn't recover from your training anymore. You were feeling burned out. Like, what was that whole situation like? Like, what led to it? And like, what was the breaking point for you?
Yeah. So during this time, it was probably a period of, I would say, 6 or 7 years. And most of the time, I would train twice a day, in the morning and in the early afternoon. And I'm not talking really programmed training. I was lifting very, very hard and lifting very, very heavy. Looking back, there was a period of my life, maybe 10 to 15 years, where I was chronically sore. I was really, really sore and beat up, to the point where my mobility had gone. I was too tightened to get into a deep squat. I couldn't even sit cross-legged on the ground. But this was normal to me. This is where I connected with my friends in the gym. This is where I met girls that I dated. This was just my life, that I'd go to the gym and I'd train super, super hard. Now, I had achieved more of an aesthetic look, like this bodybuilding look that I'd been going for in my early 20s, but it started to add up into a big cost. Now, the lifting, I think, was really the driving force, but I've gone through many phases in my life as far as athletics go. So when I actually felt the burnout at the time, I was still doing very heavy lifting, setting a lot of PRs. I was doing a lot of bouldering. So if you don't know bouldering, it's climbing without a rope, but typically on a shorter wall in a gym or on a boulder. So the boulder, maybe it's going to average 10 to 15 feet off the ground. Some boulders are obviously much larger, but it is an activity which is very much strength oriented. Body weight to strength ratio is very important, and it has high central nervous system requirements. So doing two activities which were very yang, I'll say, not so yin, it really started to get me to a point where I started to feel fatigued. Now, I just mentioned that yin and yang right there. And I think it's important because that is the balance that I did not have anything of. It was always going toward the yang and always expending energy. And I've always had a big appetite, but the appetite couldn't fix the problem of I'm getting chronically fatigued and I'm getting overtrained. So in addition to the bouldering and the lifting, I was also trail running at the time, doing a lot of hard hiking in the mountains and pretty much anything else that my friends would invite me to do. So just a really, really hard charger. Now, I had a goal of doing a triple body weight deadlift. So I was 167 pounds, and that was about 500 pounds. And I felt good one day. I had been training for it, 2 heavy deadlift sessions a week, and I finally pulled that. But that was the start of the end for me. I was so tired by that point that I didn't have a lot of energy. I didn't want to be in the gym. I did not want to talk to people. It was hard to do my job or my own training because I was just really, really burnt out on the gym. And I thought that was it. I thought taking a week off or so would help me to kind of fix this new problem that was arising. But I had to check in with myself and realize it was a much deeper problem, that I was severely overtrained. And this can manifest as gaining weight or losing weight. For someone like me, it's losing weight, and particularly muscle mass. I think the biggest tell for me is that my motivation had completely waned. I was not motivated, and people know me back then and today as super type A, super motivated, super on top of things. I did not feel that way. And one of the worst things is I lost a lot of my libido. And when you're a guy, especially a young guy, and things like that are starting to go, you're not interested in pursuing the opposite sex or going on dates or anything of that matter, something is definitely up. So what happened is I was also getting another certification to reach my clients at a deeper level. And this is called Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Practitioner, which is a course based on holistic health where you're doing things like lab testing. So testing cortisol, doing blood tests to see what free testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, doing gut tests to see what's going on in the gut, and just getting more in depth in my coaching so I could help other people. I ran all the tests on myself. So the biggest well, the first test I ran rather was a cortisol test. Now, if you don't know cortisol, it's known as a stress hormone, but it's absolutely essential for life. And cortisol is typically highest right when we wake up. That's what gets us out of bed. So as melatonin goes down right before we wake up, cortisol spikes, that gets us out of bed, gets us moving. And throughout the day, cortisol goes back down and melatonin rises, and that's when we go to sleep. So a normal curve should look very high in the morning and pretty low at night. When I tested my cortisol, it was completely flatlined. It was rock bottom, which we would say is exhaustion. Your body can't keep up with the demands that are being put on the body. And that was likely from the working out, way too much. And that really showed me that I needed to rest. But I'll tell you this, I tried everything else except for getting rid of the exercise. I tried as many supplements as I could take. My sleep was always on point, so that was good. I was still really abusing caffeine because a lot of trainers have to abuse caffeine based on the hours. And that went on for a couple of months before I finally realized, all right, dude, you need to take a break. So I figured what's truly important to me and what is not. What am I doing to try and impress other people that I don't really care about? And that list was pretty hefty. There were a lot of things that I was doing that weren't really for me. What my true passion lied in is kettlebell training. I really liked it. I love the fact that it was different from the barbell. It was different from other stuff that I did. It was very technique oriented. It was very fun because, again, just like the riding, I'm never going to be perfect at kettlebell training, but I'm going to get a lot better. I'm going to learn something every time I train. I'm going to feel the movements where they're supposed to be felt. And it makes you really strong. Even though kettlebells aren't as heavy as a barbell, they just have this magic, what the heck effect we call it, that makes you super strong and super resilient. So I said, okay, I am going to do an experiment and I'm just going to see how it is. And if it's not working, then I'll change it, right? That's what we need to do. Just be your own scientist. So I told myself, you're going to do 2 training sessions per week and you can do double kettlebell work. And that should be enough stimulus for you. So you're not going to lose muscle mass while you're resting and recovering from having this discordant cortisol pattern. So I did it. And it felt pretty good. It was a little bit tough because I was used to doing 2 things a day every day. And I just do one thing twice a week, which was the kettlebell training. And on my off time, I would go hiking. The hiking wasn't super intense, but it got me outside, got me breathing fresh air. And it was a moving meditation. And fast forward doing this about 3 months, I started to feel better. And I started to want to add volume and intensity to my training sessions. And lo and behold, I started putting on muscle mass. And I was so surprised by that. But looking back, it's because I was finally resting. I wasn't beating my body up all the time to where everything was off. Actually, everything felt pretty good. And it's like, okay, man, like you did the proper stimulus, and now we're going to reward you with better anabolic hormones and more muscle mass and less body fat. So I knew I was on to something, but I was always very careful to check in with myself on days where I was feeling anxious. Oh, I want to train. Oh, I want to go to the gym. Asking myself, what is this truly about? Now, during this time in my life, I was really interested in the philosophy of minimalism. And I really got the idea to study that from reading Henry David Thoreau's Walden. I was very interested in his solidarity, his time in the woods, building his cabin, and the whole experiment that he ran. And at the time, I was studying a lot of Buddhist literature and seeing a lot of these monks, these East Asian monks who really just owned a robe and an alms bowl. And that's all of their possessions. And wondering, why do we have so much material stuff? Does it really make us happy? Me wondering to myself, like, why do I have so many clothes when I choose to wear the same clothes every day? And same with nutrition. Why am I trying to vary all this stuff when I know these foods don't work with me and these foods work great? And I saw a lot of beauty in that, to the point where, okay, I am prone to have paralysis by analysis. I'm prone to being overwhelmed. What if I just simplified all these things? So it had worked with the training. I simplified my training, just did maybe 5 or 6 movements. It worked with my material possessions and my nutrition. And it started me on this path of finding this minimum that would actually lead to a maximum. And I think minimalism is a cool philosophy, because the minimum can lead to the maximum. And the maximum for me is I want time to write. I want time to train and get into my art. And I want to be able to do the things that I want to do and not do the things that I don't want to do. So minimizing the things that don't serve me, but maximizing the things that do serve me, I think has been a really beautiful path for about the past 5, 6, 7 years. And that's still where I'm going strong. And I really approach most of my life that way. And it's been really, really beautiful to see how things have developed from there.
That's great. I think what's especially interesting about your story is I get asked this periodically, like, how do I know, if I'm working into overtraining or I feel like I'm overtrained? It's like, no, you will know if you are overtrained. Believe me,
You'll know.
you're
Yeah.
you're probably just a little under recovered. Like you are not truly, truly overtrained. And on that note too, I know that Jeff Newport, who's been a guest on this show a couple of times, has said that, and I think this is like the best summary of it, is that it's not about how much you can train, it's about how much you can recover from.
Mhm.
And our desires, our ambitions might be very outsized, but we also have to keep in mind that our recovery capacity is not. And as we get older, it has a tendency to shrink. That doesn't mean you can't make gains, because you can still continue to get stronger and fitter and all this other stuff, but you have to make sure that it is squaring with your ability to actually recover from what you're doing. And it sounds like this is something that's very common, as people will do a lot of probably what you would agree you were doing, like junk volume, meaning they're doing a lot all this extra work, but it's actually not only is it not having the intended effect, it's having the opposite effect, and it's making your training much more difficult. It's reducing your ability to make use of the good training that you're doing. And then when you narrow things down to just 2 double kettlebell sessions per week, obviously you started on yourself. When did you start doing that with clients as well?
With clients, it always depended on what equipment the client had available to them. Most of my clients are in-home sessions. So thankfully we have the ability to have a small home gym with double kettlebells. And, to this point, I have begun to train a lot of other people, let's say with chronic fatigue or hypothyroidism or anything else that I've learned about over the years. And we can still do double kettlebell work if they're interested in the technique and they have fun doing it. That's what we'll do. But we can also do single kettlebell work, or we can do dumbbell or barbell work. It really just depends on what's going on. It's a check-in each time that we train. I'm not very strict with programming, because things change. People don't sleep. People have kids. People have vacations. So there's always a template of what we're going to do. And if I'm being honest, it's a template of hinging, squatting, pushing, and pulling. Maybe some isolated core work if that's what we need, or work on the lower back and back extension, stuff like that. So I mostly operate from a template. But if people have double kettlebells and they like to train that way, that's the direction that we'll go. But I will say that my preference is when we do mostly kettlebell training. And, there are always those people who want the aesthetic goals too. So we'll do the hip thrusts and the barbell bicep curls and whatever else. That stuff is fun to do too. But I make sure and offer the training that they need in addition to the training that they want, just because that's smart personal training and that's how you maintain clients.
Yeah, big time. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, is that, like what you mentioned, that people got, maybe they have like a kid was up all night puking, so they got like 2, 3 hours of sleep. Well, you're not going to do your scheduled hard day like you had, perfectly periodized. And so you have to keep in mind that you have to have a template, you have to have a philosophy in place. And it sounds like yours is obviously mastery of the material and really treating it as almost like an art form, so that you can really get the most out of it, rather than being like, okay, I'm going to just see how hard I can push this person.
Oh
People
yeah.
think that's what they want. That's not really what they want.
No, it's not really what they want. And, there are some people who that's what they want. I've trained a lot of military personnel here in San Diego and a lot of Navy SEALs and consulted with them. And my biggest advice to them is to slow way down. So as long as they have a coach who knows what they're doing, maybe we're doing deadlifts and I'm say, hey, we have 5 minutes break, and you just keep them occupied until that, so they don't end up overdoing it. But I was going to mention to you, with a lot of clients, it's kind of funny, because the way I designed the course, MED kettlebell chains, is to maximize power, strength, conditioning, pretty much everything that kettlebells can offer the person. So it's funny if someone's like, hey, I want to lose some body fat. It's like, okay, great. We're going to do the MED kettlebell chains, except for we're going to do on the minute work. So get them breathing a little bit more. Like, hey, I want to maximize strength. Okay, great. Here are the ladders that we're going to do. And we're going to have 28 kilo bells instead of 24 kilo bells. And for instance, if they want power, kind of the same idea, right? Maybe a little bit more break. So it really is a template, which I'm in love with because it's my base and I hope it's the base for so many other people. And if you want extracurricular work, great, add it. If you don't, you don't have to. You're sick, you're coming off of COVID or whatever else. Great, let's get back to your base and build that back up. It's just something that I feel for me and for so many people, I can maintain into my 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, hopefully 90s and do all this stuff. I never thought that I could maintain the triple body weight deadlift. It's just something that was too hard on my body. It took its toll on me mentally and physically. And that's why I've arrived at this very, very happy medium, this balance of the yin and yang, where, hey, I can find equilibrium here and I'm making myself happy and I'm serving other people by doing this work and showing the techniques. And my favorite part is sharing the philosophy of it, because I think a lot of people are interested in that, but they might not know how to articulate it, what their training is and what it can be for the rest of their life, how this stuff organizes not only your health, but organizes how you see the world at large and your responsibilities in your work and pretty much everything. So I think it's really been great for me and I hope it's great for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to know more about the MED chains because it sounds to me like this is sort of like your magnum opus in many ways, because this has been like the long journey that has led you from, being like uh, not even super active, almost like hyperactive, in your in
Yeah.
your strength training and your athleticism to doing what you like to call the MED chains, or minimum effective dose. But what's really impressive is that you're able to do it in such a way where you're not maintaining what you've done before, you're actually improving on what you've done, and just with like a couple of pairs of kettlebells. But having gone through the course and read through the material myself, what it really appears to be kind of like the magic of it is the very precise focus on technique and performance of each of these things that I don't want to say makes up for the non-insane amounts of volume, because it's a reasonable amount of volume, but it actually makes that volume of work much better for the person doing it. So give us some ideas in particular on like how to use technique and a really sharp focus on it for getting a lot stronger with all these different kettlebell moves in lieu of just adding insane amounts of volume.
Yeah, I would rather have quality reps. And I think you're probably the same as me. So that might mean a little bit more break time in between. And the student can pick their break time. I think as they get a little bit more comfortable with the two chains that are in the program, basically a clean press and squat, and then a clean push press and overspeed squat. They're very, very similar movements, but one is going to be strength focused and one is a little bit more ballistic focus. So getting that power in there, very, very simple. Now, if someone's getting in shape, they can take less rest period. That's great. You're improving your conditioning. If the kettlebells are a little bit too light for you, awesome. You can move them faster and you can have more of a power focus. If that's not enough work for someone who's an athlete or has a particular goal, then they can add a swing to the end of their chains, or they can do a double snatch. The work with the extra ballistics, that will be in the next iteration of the course. And I'm super excited. I've had a lot of people test that out, including myself. And let's say you hate doing 5 reps, but 4 reps is no problem. In my training, what I've been doing are ladders 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you're doing these training sessions, it's like, that's not that hard. But then after the training, I'm like, oh, I did 40 reps of each. And it's a really great stimulus for growth. But I'll tell you, I feel good the next day. I can do more training. So how it's affected me, I'll tell you, I did the course as written many, many times through before the course was actually done. And now I'm shifting my focus into actually lower reps. So doing the 1, 2, 3, 4 ladders. And that's just so approachable for so many people, where you could just start with ladder number 1 of 1 rep, keep on warming up. And by the time you're at rep number 4, your body's totally warmed up. And I like to put a clock in front of me so I can take the amount of time I need between breaks. And Again, if I'm feeling really froggy, if I'm feeling really rested, or let's say I couldn't train for a few days because of clients, then maybe I'll add in the extra conditioning with the double swing or the double snatch. I think it's so simple. I don't even want to claim it's my own, but just this concept of you have a couple movements, you can add to it, you can subtract to it, you can do on the minute work, you can, make it a little bit heavier if you want to get stronger. The sky's the limit with this stuff. And it's so adaptable. And as a trainer, I always want to be adaptable to the needs of my clients and the needs of myself. Going back to burning out, I really need to check in with myself. So yesterday I had 7 clients and didn't really feel like training. So I took it easier, but I still did the chains and felt great afterward. So that is my goal, is to make the program adaptable, to meet people where they're at. If they have other lifting goals or sporting goals, great. We can adapt the program to that and do other stuff in the meantime. But the focus is always on the minimum effective dose and getting you to proper recovery.
That's great. And you mentioned like saying that you're not really laying claim to having created or this kind of approach. And I want people to know too that this is a very legit approach. And I remember hearing about, and I don't want to talk in particular about like the obsession with volume versus flipping that on its head and not worrying nearly as much about the volume, but really focusing on the technique. So there's a master kettlebell instructor. He's been on the show, Mark Rifkin. I mean, he's competed at a high level in all sorts of different things. And one of the things I remember him telling at an SFG event a number of years ago is he said he kept getting hurt when he was squatting when he was training for powerlifting. And part of it was because he was doing a method that is just known for having an extreme amount of volume. And his wife, Tracy, said, well, what if you were to treat like every single element of the squat as though it were a rep? And so that way you could really just focus on doing higher quality work and not as many reps. And so he tried it. And so it was like getting under the bar was a rep, getting it out of the rack was a rep, walking it back was a rep, squatting down was a rep, standing up was a rep, walking it back was a rep, putting it back onto the rack was a rep. And so he did this, he cut his volume by like a super significant amount, but at his next competition, he actually hit a PR, I think, if I'm remembering the story correctly. So people think that, oh, this seems kind of like a new age sort of like pie in the sky fantasy. But the reality is that's 100% the case for most people. You got a guy who was a highly competitive power lifter hitting PRs with this approach. So how much better can it work for the average person who is not competing, but rather is, competing against who they were yesterday? They're not competing against their neighbor or the other person in the personal training session. They're competing against who they were in the past. And they're doing that by checking what their circumstances are like in the present, because all you have to do is keep moving forward. The speed is much less important. And in fact, I would say the speed might be the least important thing, because if you're driving 60 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone, you're going to get pulled over, and so you're going to get in trouble. This is true on the street. This is true with your body. And so that's the really great thing about med chains or MED chains. I like to call it med chains because I just like to
That's
cram
cool.
the words together. But now people can. Oh, and I want to mention one more thing before we forget. There's another element that I really like about it. Part of it is the mobility focus, because I think that that's something people really need. But the other part that people may not realize is that there's also a pretty heavy original strength focus in the program. And now I want to talk about that briefly because I know you got into original strength. And if I'm not mistaken, it was also Franz Schneidman who kind of introduced you to that?
Yeah, exactly. It was Franz. And I had heard about original strength forever. And it was actually at a Strength Matters seminar. This was probably 2016 or 2017, where I met Tim and Danny and did some of their work and thought it was super cool and very, very approachable. And again, this focus on things being really simple in an industry where you're using $20 words to describe everything in movement. It's kind of a turnoff to a lot of people, where it's like, hey, you really just need to get someone to exercise and that's going to fix most of their problems. Their approach was fantastic. So I went through their course earlier this year and started implementing all of that stuff with my clients. And just back to the personal training, you're going to have clients who show up completely stressed out, and this is not irregular, but I can do a couple of techniques and maybe have them do some crocodile breathing and get them into some gentle rocks, tell them to shut their mouth, tongue on the roof of the mouth, breathe through the diaphragm. And the person who's anti-meditation, because they think it's too hard, finds this meditative element where they're actually using their belly to breathe properly, and they leave the session in a great mood and their body feels better and their back doesn't hurt and their traps aren't super tight. I think it's just a brilliant program that I am so excited to take more advanced courses with, because I think it just does something for everyone. And I don't know scientifically what it's doing, but I know every time I get on all fours and do some resets, my body feels better. My back doesn't hurt. And then do some crawling afterward. And it just puts the body in this position where, hey, now I'm ready. I'm not so guarded anymore. I feel like I can load properly. And I'm just very, very impressed with it. Not only that, I think they're really great people and a really great community. And I think that is super important in today's fitness atmosphere where everyone's an expert and everyone's inventing exercises and this and that. So yeah, it's been a great experience working with Tim and Danny and Original Strength at large.
Yeah, and I have to say, I've been a little behind on creating my own exercise. I realized, thank you for reminding me, I need to invent one now as well. But yeah, the great thing about the original strength element within the MED chains is that it's really good for helping you to not only prepare for the work at large, but actually to even improve the technique. And in a program that's so like highly focused on the technical side of things, I think that so many people see so many improvements in their kettlebell technique with just a few minutes of original strength a day, that it's like I look at this as like one of those little keystones within the program that you blink and you would miss it, but if you leave it out, you're going to notice almost immediately, like today's squats didn't feel as good, or the cleans weren't as explosive or whatever. So yeah, it's a great program that's got a good mix of the essential kettlebell techniques done to perfection, along with some assistance work in the form of the original strength resets, some specialized mobility things, and of course it was designed by an expert. You don't get to elite status within StrongFirst, by being some amateur who just kind of does these things on the weekend. So,
and I'll tell you this. This is really important to me. I think the double kettlebell clean or even the single kettlebell clean remains one of the hardest movements, even for quote unquote experts with kettlebells. It's just a tough movement and it takes a lot of practice. So I actually chose not to give that a ton of instruction in the book because I don't want people psyching themselves out before they do it. I think it's going to come in time. And I remember back in 2013, 2014, when I was learning to clean, I would bang my wrists as well. And I got to a point where I didn't want to bang my wrists anymore. So I just figured out how to do it properly. So my wrist stopped hurting. And that's kind of my goal with everyone. Of course, there are more techniques that we'll go over to really master the kettlebell clean, but I would like to approach this stuff with, hey, why don't you just give it a shot? Let's see what it looks like. And we'll reverse engineer the movement. I don't like to be a form Nazi to a point where someone's not even training. I think it's just fun to move around and train, and we'll definitely make sure that you're safe with this stuff. But if you're coming to train with me or use me for training guidance, I want you to have a great time while you're getting in shape. And if the interest is there, we'll refine the technique over time. And another goal of mine is just have everyone make their technique work, their craft, and make it their art and make it super fun and something that you can do long term. And when the technique is there, then you can start to implement more strength and more power and then the conditioning. So when I do these training sessions, I almost get a runner's high afterward because I feel so good. And that's my hope for everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, I think a good concluding note is that at the end of your training sessions, you should feel fit enough, number one, to do it all again, but good enough also to tackle the other things in your life. Like you feel you got to win in your book that day, and then anything you got to do at work or anything you got to do with anything else in your life, like the grown-up responsibilities that we've all got. You should feel like you've got the focus, you've got the energy, you've got the strength to do it. Last thing you want to do is feel like you've just been completely drained of all your energy. So you want to go from being drained to getting gains. That is the whole point. So
Nice.
keep this in mind.
I'm
You're
going to
welcome
steal
to
that.
Yes, you're more than welcome to. Not even I'm gifting it to you. That's
Oh, thank you so much. So
yeah.
kind.
Now, I'll probably keep using it too, but nevertheless, it's the gift
Okay,
that
I'll
keeps on
quote you.
giving. Yes, exactly. Now, where can people find you online? Where can they follow you and get more insight into your work?
Yeah. So the best thing is probably Instagram. That's the easiest. I'm at John Parker, 2 underscores afterward. And I post a lot of my own training and that of my clients on there. I think I'll probably start posting a little bit more technique and some cueing for people, just whatever they find useful. I also talk a lot about overall holistic health, whether that's nutrition, or sleep or stress reduction. I'm really big on the stress reduction side of things. And, that can even come in the form of wearables and seeing your stress levels on like your Garmin watch, for instance, tracking sleep. I like doing stuff like that. It's not right for everyone, but I think training is just one piece of the pie. And for me, just kind of back to this minimalism concept, it has helped me to organize my thoughts in a way that's very conducive to personal growth in my lifestyle and my work and my relationships. But again, it's just one cog in the wheel. And we need all these aspects to be very healthy and helpful in our lives and to our community. But I choose to approach it mainly from training because that's what has taught me the most. And that's what I use for other people. But I think we're complete as is, but we can always work on ourselves. And training is a great way to empower yourself. And for those people who need to lose body fat, training definitely essential, but use the philosophies on your nutrition. And for the people who maybe need to gain some muscle, again, training, and then use the philosophies on your nutrition. So there is something for everyone in that. But I think having a system to follow is very, very important. And once you know the system, you can make the system your own and be very adaptable with that. And it's just how I've structured my life. And I'm hoping that that's rubbing off on other people because that's really the goal, is to improve everyone's life.
Definitely. Well, having seen some testimonials from the people who have worked with you, I would have to say, I think you're succeeding. I think all you got to do is just keep after it. And so I definitely encourage people to follow you. If you're on the Original Strength, if you're in the Original Strength Institute's email list, be sure to keep an eye out. I know Danny has been writing to everybody about your new program that is launching through Original Strength. Definitely recommend everybody to check it out. Brilliant work, very fun stuff. And John, thank you for coming on the Hammercast. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been a pleasure for me, Alex. Again, longtime fan, looking forward to developing the relationship more and talking shop and doing more writing. So thank you so much.
Likewise, you're welcome to Nebraska anytime you want. I'll
All
be
right.
more than happy to take you through the cornfields and the other assorted interesting things that we have here. So, guys, thank you very much for listening. And as always, have fun and happy training.